Hello and welcome to the 8th episode of SOL's 2023 webinar series featuring presentations on ecological land care. My name is Christine and I'm the Special Projects Lead with SOL. I'm happy to be your host today. I live in Ottawa, the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. SOL's webinar series is held every 2 weeks on Tuesdays at this time, so noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. This month's theme is Enhancing Biodiversity, and you can find all of the monthly themes and registration information on SOL's website. This episode is being recorded and will be available on SOL's website and YouTube channel in the next week or so. Before I begin, I'd like to mention that this webinar series and much of SOL's work is made possible by the ongoing and generous support of Gaia College, Canada's leading college for professional development and diploma courses in organic land care. SOL is also supported by its members, so if you haven't joined yet, I invite you to do so. At the end of this presentation, we will have 15 minutes or so for discussion. So I invite you to put any questions that you have during or after the talk in the chat box, or you can unmute and ask your question directly. Finally, for today's presentation, I'm very pleased to introduce Jeanne McRight, President of Blooming Boulevards, a not-for-profit organization in Mississauga, Ontario, that's been active for 5 years almost, creating a network of pollinator gardens across the city. So with that, I pass it over to you, Jeanne.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's delightful to be here. I really appreciate being invited to be a presenter, and it's going to be a very fine half hour or so of doing the presentation. And then after that, I'm happy to talk, answer any questions that people might have. Okay, so we're going to get started. You can see right here on my splash screen, that's me standing there on the day that we were doing our very first display booth, signing up our very first members, and we had just finished growing about 2,500 plants. And that summer, our very first summer, and this was in 2019, 4 years ago, we were ready to plant our first 13 gardens that year. Okay, and in those 4 years, what we have done is we now have 250 or so members. We've got a monthly newsletter with a circulation of about 2,500 that goes to all over the world. We do 30 some online presentations and webinars every year. We put in gardens not only on boulevards, and we have over 300 gardens that we have created in the past 4 years all over the city of Mississauga. But we also have trained teams of volunteers who are plant propagators, and they are taught how to grow native plants from seed. We go out with permission and we gather up the seed, grow them, stratify them, and grow them in pots, harden them off, and then we distribute those to people who apply for their boulevard garden. So I'm going to be talking about that a bit. We've come far in the past 4 years, and so we just had our 4th birthday, and now we are a month into our 5th year, and so excited about what's coming up in the future. And this year is all about growth, and so will be the next several years. So welcome to Blooming Boulevards. What we do is we raise awareness. We've won 3 awards of merits and awareness, community awareness awards from our local Credit Valley Conservation Authority, I'm proud to say. We provide help to people who want to create boulevard gardens or pollinator gardens. We grow those native plants, and then we instruct people on their importance and how to cultivate the plants and how to maintain their gardens. And then, of course, like I mentioned, we offer much educational many opportunities for learning and doing, not only just studying and listening to other people talk, but also hands-on learning. So that's very important. Understanding is very important. Creating connections is very important. So what we do is we create habitat garden networks. What we want to do is not just sprinkle gardens around, but we want to create networks so that our garden networks connect larger habitat areas, because not only are pollinators impacted by shrinking habitat, loss of habitat, but also by its the separations between all the little parks and communities, and they can't fly from one to another. And so we're trying to, our gardens are ways to link those larger green spaces together and create a network. We connect neighborhoods to nature. So people don't, they're growing hands-on, up close and personal, the wildflowers that nurture pollinators. And so that when you walk down the street, when you pull out of your driveway to go to work, when you come back in the evening, when you're sitting on your front step enjoying your coffee, there's your garden right there, and you can watch on a daily basis the pageant of nature unfold. So not only can you see all of this, witness this wonderful miracle of life, but also, and it's truly a revelation if you are new to gardening with native plants, immediately they're found by insects, and those insects are insects that might be that you have never noticed or never had any idea existed. And so we connect neighborhoods to nature. Biodiversity in Ontario is at risk, and this is why we are functioning and operating this way. We've lost 98% of our grasslands. This is just Southern Ontario, but this is a figure for most of North America. I was reading today about the prairie, how the great loss of the great prairies, the prairie meadowlands, the tall grass prairies, the short grass prairies, and all the different kinds of prairie lands that they're in central US and Canada. And the figure is about 98% in most areas. And that is an extremely severe concern. It's very much grounds for concern, because this is a major habitat for insects, particularly pollinating insects, which need flowers and those grasses for breeding and health, and they're to maintain biodiversity and resilience in the face of climate change. Okay, other major losses include 80% forest. Our wetlands have been greatly impacted, 70%, and there goes your turtles. 200 plus animals, plant and animal species are now classified as being locally at risk or extirpated, including, and there goes Ontario's turtles. So part of the reason is that we have a huge preponderance of monoculture lawns, and the lawns are basically European turf grass, their species. And so we need to reduce or shrink the amount of grass that we are growing, and replace our grass as a strong, huge amount of territory and land space that's being occupied by grass. If we occupy some of that space with pollinator friendly or wildlife friendly habitat, it's going to make a huge difference in terms of carbon and our cleanliness of the atmosphere, etc. It's not time to get too much more into that, but just so that you understand the concept that a large swatch of lawn multiplied by a large suburban neighborhood, front yard and backyard, or boulevard areas, or public parkland, or corporate grounds, for example, which is typically all mowed, is not going to be sustainable habitat for insects, and in particular bees, and in particularly our strong native pollinating bees. Okay, so where are the bees? The bees are here. This is the backyard. It's my backyard, which formerly was regular. It had roses, it had lawns, it had lots of sun. And now I planted trees. I got rid of my lawn. I planted wildflowers, and now it is absolutely alive. And I can firsthand testimony say that this garden is full, crammed full of insects that pollinate the flowers. And not only that, but also the flowers are able to be, their seeds can be transported, and then they work their way down and around the neighborhood. Okay, so you are spreading goodness much further than your local property by including pollinating native plants and fostering and supporting pollinating insects. They don't just stay in your yard, they go elsewhere and they breed and they make babies. It's like throwing a pebble into a pond. One good thing generates many, many, many more good things. So our gardens support pollinators, and the reason why is because most of Ontario's 400 native bee species have a limited foraging range, and sometimes it's less than 100 meters. The average is between 100 and 300 meters. Okay, that is very short. So most of our parkland, our public neighborhood parks, are further away than that. And so in urban areas, their natural meadow habitats are rapidly disappearing. The local populations are trapped in isolation from one another. They interbreed then, therefore, their genetic resiliency decreases. They just don't have enough genetic integrity to sustain stresses, climate stresses, any kind of disease or pathogen impact. And so the population implodes and it finally dies out. So that's responsible for the decline of many species. And particularly people learn about the rusty patch bumblebee, which used to be so common. It used to be our most prevalent insect, and now the last rusty patch bumblebee was seen in the mid 1980s. Okay, and this is really of serious concern. So sustainability is no longer about doing less harm, it's about doing more good. And design your own pollinator garden is the subject of our talk today. So we're going to talk about 4 different topics: site considerations, choosing your plants wisely, making a plan, and then I will show you how to get access to our wonderful online gallery called Native Plant All Stars, which is a great resource for you. We have that on our website, and it is a downloadable resource. So consider your site. Your garden should complement your site. And there's many wonderful possibilities. Of course, not everyone has a yard, so we can make pollinator gardens on balconies and rooftops. I'm going to concentrate today on in-ground gardens, though. And I do teach another workshop, a webinar called gardening with a container, native plant gardens, designed in containers, and a lot more, which you can find on our website. So wonderful possibilities. Let nature inspire you. This is always a good place to start. Go out for a walk in a natural place and take a look at your guidebook or your plant app, ID app, and see what you can find, what actually is growing there. And that is going to be the basis for you in your garden if you're just starting out. So this is the look of a natural prairie. You can see there's just the landscape goes on forever. There's very few trees. The prairie is subject always, it's maintained this way. If it didn't have the stresses, then it would slowly succeed to forests. First, shrubs would come in, and then eventually trees, and in the whole pattern of natural succession. But what happens in a natural prairie is that there are fires, or else the herds of buffalo will come stampeding over, or they'll be browsed. All the vegetation is browsed and kept crop low by herbivores. And that is what keeps the prairie land functioning. And so over the millennia, our tall grass prairies here in Ontario that used to be extensive has shrunk because we have not subjected the land to those kinds of stresses. And also because the land has been converted to agricultural use, and it has been built up, right, especially right around Lake Ontario where I live. It's been industrialized and it's been urbanized. So we've lost our prairie, or we're in the process of losing our prairie. And like I said, we've lost 98% of this wonderful biome, which is ecologically so rich. However, people are now doing restoration. So groups of people, conservation authorities are restoring meadowlands and large tracts, and creating seed mixes specifically for different kinds of prairies situations. Okay, so this is when you're the definition of a meadowland. The difference between a meadowland and a prairie is that a prairie doesn't have trees or shrubbery, and a meadowland usually is bordered or bounded by trees. It has generally more water available to it. But you can see the plants that grow in swaths and in drifts in a restoration, and that's important to keep in mind if you have a larger property or a field that you're restoring. This is the Lurie Garden, very well known, designed by landscape architect Pete Udolph. And it is remarkably, it is grown on top of a parking structure. Okay, it's the soil is very shallow. It's bounded by a large sort of wall of hedging, and it is quite extensive. Lurie is L-U-R-I-E. You can look it up and research the plants. There's a great list of plants that they have available, but it's right in the heart of downtown Chicago. And it's based on the design, the natural design and the growth patterns of a real meadow or prairie land. Of course, Chicago is the heart of prairie country, and so they have lots of models and inspiration there. So this is another urban meadow. It's on an elevated walkway in lower New York City and lower Manhattan Island. It's called the High Line, also designed by the same architect, landscape architect Pete Udolph, based on the look of a tall grass prairie, which is typical of eastern prairies. And again, it's a haven of refuge for urbanites. They found rare insect species here, right in the heart of Manhattan. How they found it, I don't know, but it's pretty amazing. And it's important that these restorations and bits and pieces exist. First, they raise awareness. Second, they are havens of refuge. And third, they keep the prairie and the wildlife going. They're repositories of genetic material. Okay, so here's a naturalized meadow and suburban parquet. Generally, it's going to have a greater proportion of flowers than a natural prairie would have. It's still important that it include grasses, though. Here's a pocket meadow, and you can see that it has more of a design and an intentional look. The flowers are carefully arranged for color, for texture, nice clean edges. And so that's fine too. The insects don't care. All they want is the food and the nesting sites and the foraging ability, shelter. So they would be very happy if you liked a formal design and you have a small property. That is going to be helpful as well. So you want to relate your garden to its function. So this is a teaching garden in a schoolyard. You can see it's conceived as a raised bed. It's labeled and it's got little stepping stone paths that are very attractive. It's planted with carefully chosen plants, and it's a teaching garden. So it's going to work quite well. Let's give it a few years and the whole thing will be covered with plants that are filled in, and of course all the insects and the butterflies and the bees and pollinating insects are going to be there too. So here's a colorful foundation bed and a home entryway. And these are all functional uses. This is a boulevard garden, okay, and must be tolerant of pollutants, salt, for example, the calcium leaching from the sidewalk, and any dogs and people running by or bicycling by, hordes and traffics of kids. This is my boulevard, by the way, and I can tell you that all of these things happen. I have kids walking, there's 2 schools, so they walk between the schools and in groups of, 10 or 20, and they're trampling all over my garden. The plants don't care, they've made babies, so if there's any empty or bare spots or things that get crushed, or dogs, for example, their babies are going to grow, and everything is fine and healthy. So here's a woodland dry shade under trees. Okay, there are plants for that. You don't have to go for your hostas and your hydrangeas. Okay, there's many other choices. These are bluebells, and there's mayapples there, and the yellow flower. I'm not quite sure what it might be, but there's lots of choices for yellow, and all the colors and textures in the shade. A windy prairie garden with the grasses and prairie plants are perfect, suited for wind and drought, very tolerant of drought. As long as their containers are deep, for their deep roots, they do very well on a high-rise balcony and will appeal to pollinators. Okay, so know your growing conditions, and that can be moist, it can be dry, it can be sunny, it can be shady, and you have to do an assessment of your site. And then you need to take into account the conditions needed for plant health. Of course, what kind of soil is there, exists, and again, how much water, is it windy? Is it airy? Is it in very tight enclosed space without much ventilation, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and you want to think about the soil, and you may make sure, if you have compacted soil, particularly, that you open it up and allow it to regain some of its porosity and permeability. If it is compacted, the soil will be dry. Nutrients, the roots will not be able to take up nutrients. There won't be much in the way of your soil biodiversity, in other words, the microorganisms that live there in the soil. And so what you need to do is you need to restore the soil by adding compost, which will feed the soil microorganisms, and those microorganisms will enable plant roots to absorb nutrients much better. And compost will benefit both sandy soil and heavy clay soils by loosening it up and enabling that soil to enabling that soil to retain water. In the case of clay soils, it opens up the particles in the clay soil and helps the water to drain. So all of that is adding organic materials such as compost. And I can recommend rotted leaves are great top dressing for any kind of soil condition. So you want to be able to control your drainage too, reducing the runoff. And there's much information there about creating rain gardens and helping your downspouts not have that water go directly into the street, which will impact into the city's wastewater system, and instead capture it with using deep-rooted native plants, which will support pollinating insects. So there's a register on how much sun your yard gets. So full sun is usually 6 hours or more of sun a day, and then your part shade is 2 to 3 hours. In between there, it has degrees of either part sun or part shade. A full shade is less than 1 hour, and really, if you've got less than 1 hour, you're dealing mostly with leaf textures and not too much bloom. Okay, so here's the look of the different gardens in different lighting conditions. So your full sun gardens generally those plants are tall, they're brightly colored. They mostly, the majority flower in the summertime. And those are the ones that appeal to bees that are active during the summer months, June, July, August, especially early September. For part shade, these are plants that bloom in the spring and then some in the fall, usually when the tree, the overhead leaf canopy thins out a bit and they get more light. And they bloom in layers. And again, you've got the taller, the understory trees, and then the shrub layer, which very often will provide flowers in the spring. And underneath there are the spring ephemerals, which are the earliest blooming plants. They bloom before the trees leaf out. So choose plants wisely, and what you're after is diverse native species, abundant pollen, and nectar across the growing season, and you want host plants for larvae. Native plants generally avoid hybrids and cultivars. It depends on the species and the hybrid and the cultivar, though. So there's much research is being done. There's lots of debate on websites about the value of hybrids and cultivars to pollinating insects. So we're not going to get into that right now, but know that some flower shapes and colors really are not usable by insects at all. For example, this Echinacea purpurea, Sweet Romance, is the name of the cultivar, has a pom-pom head, and bees just can't get the nectar and the pollen out of that flower. Okay, it's just not built that way. Instead, they need the species Echinacea, the purple cone flower, and which are always covered with insects. Okay, so there's nothing to lose by going for native. I'm a strong proponent, champion of native plants, and anybody that knows me knows that. But I do understand that people are attached to their cultivars and hybrid plants, and I would say that as long as they are supporting insects, they're supporting something other than just human aesthetics, then that is a good thing. Okay, so native insect flower relationships are mutually beneficial, and people need to understand that. Okay, so goal number one is our abundant pollen and nectar across the growing season. And bees generally, the majority of bees emerge about the time when the fruit trees flower. But the earliest bees are usually your queen bumblebees, at least in southern Ontario. Okay, and they come out and when the first woodland ephemerals start blooming in April. And late April, early May. And so we want something in flower then. Flowering shrubs are also in bloom at that time. Pussy willows are really great for those early insects. And then through the summer, you can see all the plants in bloom during the summer. And into the fall, those plants are great for bulking up, making sure that you're well nourished if you're a bee or other kind of insect, for overwintering or migrating. And those are our keystone species, our asters and our goldenrods. So we want host plants for larvae. It's not good enough to have a milkweed that flowers. We need a milkweed that also has leaves that the caterpillars can eat. Same with black swallowtails. Black swallowtails love all sorts of flowers, but they've got to have the foliage of the carrot family plants in order for their caterpillars to survive. So the host plants for larvae are extremely important, and that's why native trees are important, because butterflies and moths lay their eggs in the leaves of trees, and very often. And that is another reason why you don't want to be disposing of your leaves after they fall, because those are where all the pupae are from the moths that need to overwinter. They're attached to those fallen leaves. If you rake up your fallen leaves, you've gotten rid of your butterflies and your moths for the following year. Okay, so goal number 3 is diverse flower shapes, and this fits the insect mouth parts, okay, which have evolved together with the flowers very cleverly to help each other out. And here's a few examples. So you've got 2 types of Monarda, Jejoma, the red, and the fistulosa, which is the pink, which is bee balm is the red and wild bergamot is the pink. Okay, and they flower from June through August. Always will be covered with pollinating insects. And then there is a little hummingbird on the Jejoma. We have ruby-throated hummingbirds, which will go to Monarda Jejoma. Okay, and this is a great plant to have in your garden. Another all-star is a New England aster. Any kind of aster is great. New England asters are very tall, they're big, extremely flowery, very ornamental. Keystone plants, extremely important, and will appeal to many different pollinators. You can see the difference between the root, how deep the roots are for regular horticultural ornamental plants. In the middle is Kentucky bluegrass, which is the basis of many lawns, versus native species, and the roots go down much deeper. So those roots are helping hold the soil and drive the nutrients down deep into the soil. Think of your root community, and these are conceiving of the way that plants grow as a root community in layers. So you need to consider the ground cover layer as a matrix. That's what winds its way around all your other garden plants, and often sedges are recommended for your ground cover matrix layer. And then you have a seasonal theme layer, which is the plants that bloom according to in and out of bloom according all season long. Your structural layer are the ones that act as exclamation points in your garden that are areas of sort of design focus for beauty. Year-round wildlife support is also important. Leave those stems, folks. Okay, make sure that the birds can have the seeds, and you want to be able to allow plants or little insects to overwinter inside the stem. Okay, I've got to speed through this. So making a plan, essentially think like a pollinator, and this diagram is available to download from our website. It includes ways that the pollinators can make nests, like hollow logs on a little bare spot of ground that they can nest in. You group your plants in terms of species. So here are the lines, and straight lines look more formal, such as this, and then curvy lines look more informal, such as this. And the neat edges will avoid a weedy look if you've got neighbors that are deeply suspicious of what you're doing. So this gives the sense of intentionality. Signs can help too, if allowed. Okay, or you can go loose and natural. Okay, and this is the look of a new loose and natural garden. Also charming, absolutely charming and lovely, and it all depends on you and your aesthetic and what you like. Okay, so use symbols or color swatches, plants, space plants between 1 foot to 1.5 feet apart. That's 30 to 45 centimeters apart, depending on how big they'll be in the end. Correlate that to your plant list, and then you can just do a layout similar to that. Make a bubble diagram. And then we group our plants loosely according to height and species. So especially if it's against a wall, but if it's in the center, then what you can do is, so this would be a garden against a fence, all in swaths like that. Okay, if you have a freestanding garden, then your tall plants would be in the middle. And you consider contrasts of color, texture, and movement. Now we're talking about design here, just aesthetics and beauty. And movement, for example, a great example, I love this image, is the prairie dropseed and the pale purple coneflower that stir in the wind. And of course, the leaf texture and the color contrast of those little dark points at the center of the flower are wonderful exclamation points. But then the whole thing sways and ripples and moves in the wind. Okay. So Native Plant All-Stars, and this is just a reminder that we are offering this resource on our website. And you all, this, I'm just going to go through this. It's organized by color so that you can see the huge variety, yellows and pinks and purples. And there's the whites, the grasses for shade, the grasses for sun. Okay. And that is it, folks. And we're accepting garden applications. If you are in Mississauga for 2024, you may apply on our website. Our upcoming webinars, which you can register on our website, are free. On July 8th, I'm teaching Goodbye Lawn, and on August 18th, Understanding Your Soil, where I'll be getting into more detail. And our webinars are 1 hour long. Help us continue our good work. Please do think about joining Blooming Boulevards. It's still only $15 a year. Subscribe to our monthly newsletter. That's free, so you can visit our website and just sign up and subscribe. Donate, of course, our donations. Any donations, instantly they become gardens. So our workshop handouts are at www.bloomingboulevardsorg/services-7. And that is it. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have. And I'll stop my share right now.
Okay, well, that was an incredible presentation. Just the most beautiful gardens that you presented, a whole array of gardens, and with the design information, but also about the species connectivity with the insects that they're trying to attract. So yeah, that's very informative, and it's really amazing that you have so many resources on your website as well. And as you mentioned, webinars that are coming up that people can come and ask a lot of questions. So I'm going to invite anybody to put a question in the chat, or if you just want to put your hand up and we can unmute, or you can unmute that way and ask the question directly. But I'm going to start with one, and that is what you mentioned at the beginning, that when you first started, the efforts went into 13 specific boulevard gardens or pollinator gardens. Yes. And now you're up to approximately 300, I understand. So
yeah, that's right.
Tell us about those who sign up to install these gardens and what that process is, and how that why that has grown over time to be such a large number, and probably not enough, as you
I think I could probably talk for 3 hours just about this. The first 13, frankly, were people that we knew. We were members of our garden clubs. I'm a master gardener. I went and I did talk at Canada Blooms, just telling people about this. I had my sign up sheet, sign up. They did. And these were our brave souls, who didn't know who the heck we were and what the heck they were doing, but they were willing to give it a try. So as soon as that started happening, you could see I was there at Riverwood Conservancy signing up. And that was the North American Native Plant Society big plant sale. So they took us under their wing and set us up on the table right next to theirs. And that's where we signed people up then too. We had plants, we gave them away free. You get a free native plant if you became a member. All those sort of like cheap tricks, to try and get people involved.
Yes.
And then, so what happened once people started, they had their gardens installed and the gardens started growing, then their neighbors say, what are you doing? Like, what's that all about? Then the gardens start growing, and here they all are. People are out on the street tending their gardens, but now all these flowers. Meanwhile, right next to you, you've got this bundle of weeds that you have to mow, periodically. Okay, well, I want one like that, yeah. And that's how it happened. So we have one example that I like to use on Britannia Road here in Mississauga. Big, wide, windy road. The boulevards are particularly wide. They're very grassy and wide. So it's a lot of work for people. Of course, this does not belong to you. It's municipal property that the residents are responsible for taking care of. If they let it go, it looks absolutely terrible. One man became a member of Blooming Boulevards, and he had struggled with the concept. The man's home country was India. Okay, not used to lawn culture here in North America. Struggled with the obligation to create a beautiful lawn. Okay, sought us out, applied for one of those first gardens, put up the garden, and in 2020, and it grew beautifully. The first year it was full of flowers.
Yeah.
He got 8 of his neighbors up and down the road
Yeah.
to put in
Well,
work.
you're growing ambassadors as well, like those
We
who
have all of the people who put in gardens are ambassadors. They all have our flyers. They all are out there tending their garden. Jitendra, I interviewed him and it's on our YouTube channel. He says the way he felt when his first plant had a bud was the way he felt. His wife is standing right there. Was the way he felt when his first child was born.
Well, and then when the first butterfly showed up, that too probably was.
So it really is a thrill. He had his whole family involved. And then there was a middle school right across the street, and they started an eco club and put in a pollinator garden. This is the type of thing that's happening all over the city.
I know. So that's why I do feel like your example in Mississauga had to have something that has grown to a network. And you were talking earlier about the connectivity and the importance of, well, location as well, and the way that these gardens can be situated so that it really is beneficial for travel for insects.
Yeah.
How are you managing that then? Because if it's volunteer application, but when you specifically look at a map and want to encourage specific areas of the city, do you get involved that way and really try to encourage
Oh,
gardens
yes.
in place? Yes.
So we've made sure that we network with our different with city staff, with our other city environmental organizations. We make sure that we are supportive of what they're doing and they are supporting us. And so we're working together with that. Now we're working with different parts of the cities, the business associations, so that we're putting in, they get a grant and they hire us, to advise and put in plants. Now big condo corporations are getting involved and they're investigating. I've just put a design 4 big beds for a large condo on Rathburn Road. I can't wait. It's about ready to be installed. So this is really taking off.
So
yeah.
would you say you're really disrupting the landscape industry by having this initiative? Would you
I
say
hope not. I think that I see it as, well, now I'll tell my story if there's time. I was at Home Depot and noticed the, in the zone, pollinator plants that are now being sold at Home Depot. Also Loblaws is selling them. So no, I think Home Depot is the World Wildlife Foundation. It's not Pollinator Pathways. It's World Wildlife Fund is sponsoring the Home Depot plant. Anyway, there were these little package with 4 plants in a package. They looked good. They were locally appropriate plants. And I saw one woman looking a little confused. She had a packet and she was reading it and, really very confused looking. And I was just standing there. So I said, I'm knowledgeable about native plants. I'm happy to tell you anything I'll try to answer any question you might have. So she was asking me questions and I was telling her things. And I looked behind me and there was a whole big crowd of people around me.
Oh, really? So they kind of congregated around you to listen?
Yes, they heard me talking and
yes.
stopped and to
I've
listen.
noticed that too, is there is a real interest and yearning to have this type of information.
There is.
People are learning about the issues.
And not only that, there's a short-term reward. It's very rewarding, immediately rewards. Okay. You have something beautiful and you have something you're producing results. You can see what it's doing. Yes. Second, you know that there's a long-term benefit too. Okay. So there's an altruistic feel. you know, it's not just for you, you know, that you're doing something that is going to matter. And people want to be able to contribute in this way.
Yes. Well, yes, I think it's Sandra who's asking these questions, or Sadie maybe. I don't know who it is now because I can't see, but they're saying that they're sending in their application soon and that people have a desire to do something for the environment, and it's empowering. And I would
Yes.
also add that it's probably very nice to be part of this network because there's support for you. And it's your community members, it's your neighbor, it's the school across the street. So by doing it together, when there's always a possibility for learning some more and sharing tips and maybe problem solving, there's also just a feeling of community
Yeah.
to do it. And then the impact is greater when it's the sum of the parts. So I just feel like, yeah, what you are doing is a huge gift to not only Mississauga, definitely, but also for other municipalities to learn from.
Yes.
And do you know that others have reached out, like other community groups that are trying to model something similar to Blooming Boulevards?
Oh, yes. I get people questions all the time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. From all over the country and
Yeah.
elsewhere, Michigan, Illinois, Georgia.
Yes. Okay, well, fantastic work. And unfortunately, we don't have any more time unless anybody has a question right now. But otherwise, I have to say, really appreciate your presentation. Glad it will be up on Soul's website and YouTube channel, so you can watch it either way. And just so you know, everybody, that it's possible to go check out Blooming Boulevard's webinar series because they're in depth, and the one especially about soil is hugely important for people to really consider. So thank you very much for today and those who have joined us. And we look forward to our next presentation is in a few weeks, and we will continue this series throughout the year.
I thank you, Sol, for the important work that you're doing too.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a
Okay.
good rest of the day. Bye-bye.
Bye.